Chrono Trigger is a game I don't have to pitch to you. You're currently watching a video about its wonderfully strange sequel, Chrono Cross, so you get it. Even if you haven't played Chrono Trigger, you most likely know of it, or you at least know that it's amongst a handful of games commonly referred to as the greatest of all time. Now, I don't know if greatest of all time is a helpful title to give anything, but I do know one thing. I love Chrono Trigger. I love the characters, I love the music, I love the fast-paced combat. I love the simple but effective storytelling and the fact that it's about something. And while I think a game falls apart before our eyes the minute people start calling it the best, Chrono Trigger is, at the very least, a moment in time perfectly preserved. It's the swan song of a genre as it once was, perfected by the masters of the craft. With its development led by the dream team of Yuji Horii, Hironobu Sakaguchi, and the late great Akira Toriyama, Chrono Trigger has all the best pieces of what is now known as a retro RPG. It has the transportive, mythological feeling of Dragon Quest, the quirky ensemble and existential angst of Final Fantasy, and the iconic character design of Dragon Ball and the rest of Toriyama's legendary work. It also has a sequel. So, how did that go? Chrono Cross came out in 1999 in Japan and the year 2000 in the US, 5 years after the release of Chrono Trigger and towards the very end of the first PlayStation's lifespan. While Yasunori Mitsuda returns as composer and makes what is probably my favorite soundtrack of all time, Chrono Cross otherwise has a dramatic change of leadership. Cross was directed by the legendary Masato Kato, who wrote the script of Chrono Trigger and had previously worked as a writer for Final Fantasy VII and Xenogears. Knowing his past credentials and the games he would eventually work on, to me, his writing style is kind of analogous to the shifting tone and mood of RPGs during the late 90s and early 2000s.
Who cares? It's just one of those days!
Very broadly speaking, in the early to mid-90s, RPGs, specifically JRPGs for lack of a better genre name, were very comfortable pulling from classic fantasy. Dragon Quest was a great example of this approach, and still is. These games were reminiscent of fairy tales. Stories were light, setting and atmosphere came first, and the overall experience was driven by a sense of whimsy and wonder. There were exceptions to this mold, of course. Final Fantasy IV cold opens with the protagonist questioning his country's imperialistic ways. And Shin Megami Tensei as a series predates most RPGs and has always had a rebellious flair. But I think it's safe to say both of those games were exceptions and not emblematic of the time, although perhaps they were a sign of what was coming. By the late 90s, games in this genre were much moodier, darker, and pulling more from anime, sci-fi, and other media over classic fantasy. I think it's safe to say that Final Fantasy VII changed everything.
Actually, I'm gonna have to agree.
Thanks. This media-defining rebellious spirit was also just in the air at this point, given the rise of the grunge movement and the general attitude we associate with this decade. While FF7 was a landmark release that changed the expectation of the genre overall, I do think this shift to a more ambitious and experimental style of storytelling was somewhat more gradual. A game like Earthbound, which came out in 1995 in the US, is simultaneously a satire of the previous era of RPGs, and also a sign of the beautiful strangeness on the horizon. Chrono Trigger, which somehow came out the same year as Earthbound, is a similar halfway point between these two eras. You have the veneer of a classic RPG, but something sadder and weirder underneath. Pivoting back to Chrono Cross, it feels like what was subtext in a wordless mood in Chrono Trigger is the driving force for Cross. You can feel this change even in the premise of both games. Chrono Trigger is about a group of teenagers who gain the ability to time travel. They find out their future is doomed and seek to change the course of history before it's too late. Chrono Cross is about a young man who almost drowned as a kid, and when he goes to the beach one day to make a necklace out of lizards, he wakes up in a dimension where everything is a little different. Most notably, in this new dimension, he learns that he actually did drown back then, and technically doesn't exist in this reality. Needless to say, Cross's premise is a much harder pitch for an experience labeled a game. It almost feels like Kato and team purposely flipped everything on its head for the sequel. Instead of time travel, we have dimensional travel. Instead of 2D, we have 3D. Instead of red hair, we have blue hair. Instead of 7 characters, we have 45. Okay, if we covered all of them, we'd be here forever, as much as I would love to do that, so I'm just gonna quickly rattle off some of my favorites, and I'll give them a quick description to communicate the vibes. Ready? Okay, let's do it. Nautical Chrono, Childhood Crush, McCavity, Dead Bozo, Lisa Frank's Dog, David Bowie, Mom's New Boyfriend, Human Frog, Yassified Bozo, a Baby Dragon, Edgelord Adoring Fan from Oblivion, Human Toad. Yeah! Okay! Now, it's worth noting that despite Chrono Cross deviating from the design of its much more popular predecessor, it still did well critically and commercially, and it's not really a hot take to say it's a classic. But some Chrono Trigger fans awaiting its direct sequel were a bit confused and unhappy with what they got. And I'd also say that, to this day, Cross is still largely in the shadow of Trigger. While Trigger benefits from its simple premise and spirit of adventure, Cross is messier and weird. The only real plot in the first act of the game is that rumors have begun to spread about a certain blue-haired ghost named Surge, and he's being hunted by an antagonistic faction called the Dragoons. A mysterious thief named Kid comes to Surge's aid and wants his help infiltrating a manor to retrieve a certain artifact, the Frozen Flame. From that point on, the game introduces some villains and MacGuffins to anchor the story, but Chrono Cross is way more interested in exploring mood and atmosphere than any specific plotline. This is a game where the NPCs, unprompted, open up to you about their entire lives, and when you flip between dimensions, you can see how things went for them in the other reality. The same is true for all 45 playable characters too. You can even have them confront their other selves and enjoy the existential horror that follows. Chrono Cross is also a story with branching paths, so, for example, when you choose how to get into Viper Manor, or whether or not to team up with Kid, you'll end up experiencing a slightly different part of the game, and end up recruiting different characters along the way. So while everyone in the game is contemplating what could have been, so too is the player wondering about the road not taken. Even in combat, you're given a choice of sorts with your attack. It might be a stretch to say this is also narrative design, but I think it's interesting the game is always asking you to make a choice that rules out another possibility. I, for one, really love the existential haze that defines this entire game. Many RPGs are about saving the world, but few are about understanding your place within it. This philosophically driven narrative comes into full focus when... Hello, this is future Stephen with a spoiler warning for the midway point of Chrono Cross, specifically something that happens at the end of the Fort Dragonia chapter. If you want to avoid that, you can skip ahead to this time code. Otherwise, enjoy. I will also be lightly commenting on the finale of the game, but the major spoiler here is what happens at the end of Fort Dragonia. Also, this is Starkey. I love him. I can't believe he wasn't in my montage of characters I like. So here he is. It's Starkey, and here is the biggest spoiler of the game. Thank you. A little less than halfway through the game, our hero Surge and the villain Link switch bodies. Surge is suddenly seen by many as the villain, while the actual villain exists in our old body in another reality. While it's a fun twist, the bigger surprise is just how long you end up playing as Link's. Depending on how many side quests you pick up, you spend nearly half the game as him. And one of the magic tricks of the game for me is how attached I eventually felt towards this form. Playing as Link's is a powerful exploration of identity. In this body, people fear us, or at least talk to us differently. Characters who were previously villains join our party, we can summon cats from the depths of hell. But despite all of that, we're still the hero of the story, and eventually other people start to see that. I really love this part of the game because it almost defies the Chosen One narrative by showing how, even in the body of the villain, we can still do good, and that our souls are maybe not defined by our bodies, but rather how we treat others and the choices that we make. Unfortunately and tragically, the direction the story goes in the final act of Chrono Cross is bananas. This is not an uncommon event within this genre. Final Fantasy IX's final boss opens the scene with a Yoda quote from Phantom Menace, but Cross is on a whole other level. I won't get into the fine details of it, but the off-the-rails finale is pretty much the sole reason why I still slightly prefer Trigger as a whole, despite my love for Cross and the fact that I played it first. I admire the audacity of Cross's final act, and I'll always go to bat for a game that has a lot it wants to say, but the game attempts to say too much too quickly. And I think directly answering some of the questions the game was asking, in addition to trying to connect it to Chrono Trigger, actually makes it all less interesting. Final act aside, Chrono Cross is a game full of smaller stories that stick with you. All of the characters, playable or not, star in vignettes orbiting around a crucial decision that defined their entire life. It's harder for a game focused on these smaller stories to feel properly climactic as an RPG, so I do understand the game's instinct to suddenly want a high-stakes finale. But to me, Chrono Cross shines the most when the storytelling is on a more personal scale. The stakes feel highest not when we're saving the world, but when we see the large impact resulting from decisions we made that initially felt innocuous. Chrono Cross is a game that reminds us of the power we have over our own lives and how we are always living and progressing even when it doesn't feel like it. When one is tasked with making a sequel, it kind of feels like there are three major routes you can take. You can iterate on what worked before, you can take the foundation and make it bigger, or you can do something completely different. There's nothing wrong with those first two options. Some of my favorite games take those exact approaches. But door number 3, the make a weird sequel nothing like the first option, is always a route I respect, and arguably the one that leads to the most memorable type of experience. People still talk about Majora's Mask not because it was Ocarina 2, but because it dug deeper in a different direction no one knew was possible for the series. Final Fantasy VII completely bucked tradition established by the first 6 games, and ended up becoming such a colossal hit we still live in orbit of it. And I imagine that the team behind Chrono Cross knew that one-upping Chrono Trigger was simply impossible, and chose to go down their own path instead, for the bulk of it at least. There is an immense amount of risk when you make a sequel that is essentially new IP. There are countless examples of sequels we simply don't remember or choose not to talk about because they didn't work. Kato and team made a game that itself internally debates whether or not to be a sequel at all. And I'd argue that Chrono Cross is at its best when it's defiantly not a sequel. After all, the Chrono Trigger crew already saved the world, and the Dream Team already made the best game of all time. In both realities, what is left to do but ponder what else could have been? And that's a wrap on Chrono Cross. Thank you so much for watching this. I really hope you enjoyed it. I should be back towards the end of the year for a Game of the Year video, but this will be my last one before then. I'm sticking to the release schedule of like every few months. For those who don't know, I co-host a video game podcast called Into the Aether, and so if you're ever like, where are the videos? There's plenty of audio for you, if that's something you're interested in. But regardless, I think I made this channel at a point where, without saying too much, we were sort of debating the long-term reality of the show, like how long we were going to be doing it and if we were going to still be doing it. And I kind of made this channel as a way to still have an outlet to talk about games, something I'm clearly passionate about and wanted to do independent of whether or not the show continued. And so I think it's taken me a while. I'm getting very introspective. I think it's the Chrono Cross of it all. But I wanted to make this channel, regardless of what happened, as just a way for me to have my own outlet. And I'm very happy the show is continuing, obviously. We have no end in sight. Very exciting. But that also kind of made me have to figure out what this channel was and how it existed alongside the show and my other creative projects. It's a happy problem, but I think I needed to figure out like what this was alongside everything else. So I think I've found that. I think I've found the answer. And I'm excited to share more here. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for supporting this channel or for listening to the podcast if you're here from Into the Aether. It means a lot that I feel like I can share my thoughts and that people will have any interest in them at all. I also just like editing. Who knew? Okay, I gotta go. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.